Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. Welcome to part 2 in the series in which I tackle the question, is it mainly white men who are doing mass shootings in America? And then I look at the statistics to see if that statement is in fact correct. Now what has inspired me to make this series in the first place is comments like this one from Kylie M. Smith, PhD.
I saw a tweet the other day, where someone said, we need to figure out what the commonality in these mass shooters is, and I was taken aback. Like, it's white men. America has a white men problem. I thought that was kind of obvious. White men, especially with domestic violence and vocally misogynistic tendencies. Well, let's not forget that it's mostly about racism. Yes. It's so important to recognize how racism and racism against women of color too allows white supremacy to thrive and inflict violence against people of color.
Ah, I see. So most mass shooters are white men and it's white supremacy. It's all about racism because most of their targets are not only people of color but black women. Right. What's the technical term for this?
Bullshit! Bullshit! Bullshit, 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 bullshit! Bullshit! Bullshit, 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 bullshit! 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 Bull, 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 bull! Shit, 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 shit!
Now, it is true that males are more likely to do mass shootings than females, but the narrative that it is white males who are most likely to do mass shootings is 100% bullshit. As I showed in my last video, if you adjust for the population of each racial group, we find that blacks are the most likely racial group to do mass shootings, and that even Asians are far more likely to do mass shootings than whites. As for it being white supremacists targeting people of colour, in particular women of colour, well, in part 3 in this series I'll be looking at FBI statistics for homicides to see which racial group kills which racial group most often. Now I should say before I go on that this is an anti-black or anti-Asian or anti-white or any other racial group. I'm simply looking at the facts and I'm debunking the racist anti-white narrative which is put out by people like Kylie M. Smith, PhD, and just doesn't hold water. It's 100% bullshit. And needless to say, we shouldn't judge an entire racial group based on a very, very small minority that does wrong, whether it be black, white, Asian, or whatever. I shouldn't have to say that, but I guarantee you, just looking at the facts is going to get somebody accusing me of being a white supremacist or a Nazi, while those exact same people would give Kylie M. Smith, PhD, and others like her a free pass. But in this particular episode, in part 2 of this series, I am going to look at the mass shootings for this year and I'm going to see which group has done the most so far. Is it whites, is it blacks, or is it others? And I'm only going to have those 3 categories because I suspect that it's going to be either whites or blacks simply because blacks are more likely to do mass shootings, but there are far more whites in America. So I'm fairly confident that I can just group everyone else together in the other category, and that won't be the majority. But if it is, then I'll break that down further. Oh, and by the way, I haven't been through the list yet, so I don't know which group is going to come out on top. Now, I suspect it's probably going to be white simply because whites make up 60% of the population. Although if we were to adjust for the percentages of each racial group, I think it will be blacks. But we'll see what results we get. Now, there's a number of things I should say before we get into the list. Firstly, I'm pretty sure most, if not all of these cases haven't been to court, so we should probably treat each of the accused as someone who's been accused and not found guilty. After all, due process is, kind of important. And the information I'm using is as accurate as I can get as of the 21st of May 2021. Obviously, other information can come out after I record this and publish the video, but obviously I can't see the future. If I could, I wouldn't be recording this video at the moment. I'd be on a yacht somewhere with some busty redheads, because I would have won the lottery at least 10 times in a row. But as I can't see the future, there may be information that comes out after this recording which changes certain things. Like I said, maybe someone will be found innocent, maybe they're falsely accused, maybe the real shooter will be caught, who knows. But the information is as accurate as I can get as of the 21st of May. Which brings me to my next point. I'll try to publish this video before the end of May, but there's a chance that it might be published next month, just depending on how much time I get and whatever videos I've got to finish and put up. And I also haven't been through the list yet, so I'm recording this live and we'll discover which group is most likely or has done the most mass shootings this year together. But obviously I will be editing out the bits where I go off and research each case, because I'm sure 3 hours of me typing away on the internet will be rather boring for most of you, unless you have some strange fetish, in which case I suggest you get psychiatric help, you sick individual you. Now I'm getting the list from Wikipedia. I know they're not the best source, but I think they're pretty good for this particular thing. Like I said, I'm only getting the list from Wikipedia. I'm then going off to do further research and gathering as much information as I can. Although I suspect there's going to be a lot of cases, so I'll try to go through them fairly quickly, because I don't want this to be a 2-hour long video. And what I'm classing as a mass shooting is a shooting where there are 3 or more deaths. Now, I know that different organizations or different groups class mass shootings differently. Some say it's 3 or more deaths, some say it's 4 or more, some include injuries. It's complex, right? So for this case, it's 3 or more. I think that's about everything, so let's get stuck into it.
March 22nd, Boulder, Colorado. 2021 Boulder shooting. 10 people were killed, including a Boulder police officer, in a shooting at a grocery store. The suspect, Ahmad Al-Ali Wayalisa, was shot in the leg and has been charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder.
Yeah, well, that's a white supremacist name if I've ever heard one. So, Ahmed, or Billy Bob to his fellow members of the clan, was Syrian-born. Now, I'm pretty sure social justice types would class someone from that background as a person of colour, so I'm going to put him in the other category. Let's go on to the next one.
April 15th, Indianapolis, Indiana. Indianapolis FedEx shooting. A shooting occurred outside a FedEx facility near Indianapolis International Airport. 9 people were reported dead, including the shooter, who committed suicide. The shooter has been identified as 19-year-old Brandon Scott Hole, a former employee of the FedEx facility.
And Brandon Scott Hole was one of those dreaded white males that's doing all the mass shootings, so that's one for white males.
March 16th, Atlanta and Ackworth, Georgia. 2021 Atlanta spa shootings. A series of mass shootings occurred at massage parlors. 8 people were killed in the incidents and 1 person was wounded. 6 victims were women of Asian descent. A suspect, Robert Aaron Long, was arrested in Crisp County, about 150 miles south of Atlanta. Authorities said Long told them he was planning to continue the spree in Florida.
So that would be 2 for white males.
May 9th, Colorado Springs, Colorado. 2021 Colorado Springs shooting. 6 people were killed when a man opened fire at a birthday party in a trailer park. The shooter, Theodoros took his own life shortly afterwards.
Okay, that's another one for the other group.
April 7th, Rock Hill, South Carolina. 2021 Rock Hill shooting, 6 people, including 2 children, were killed in a mass shooting at a Rock Hill home. Former professional football player Philip Adams, the person deputies named as responsible for the shooting, was found dead at a nearby home.
Okay, I'm pretty sure Philip Adams is not a white supremacist. That's one for black.
April 5th, Allen, Texas. 2 brothers are suspected to have made a suicide pact before they shot and killed 4 family members and then fatally shot themselves in a suburban home.
Okay, so 2 brothers killed their family and themselves. So I guess that's 2 for the other category.
February 2nd, Muskogee, Oklahoma. 2021 Muskogee shooting, 5 children and 1 adult were shot and killed, and 1 other adult suffered life-threatening injuries, after a home shooting. Jaron Dejan Pridgen, age 25, was charged with the murders of the victims, his adult brother and 5 children.
And that would be another one for black.
January 24th, Indianapolis, Indiana. 6 people including a pregnant woman were killed and a teen was injured in a shooting at a house on the northeast side of Indianapolis. The teen suspect, Raymond Childs III, is currently in custody.
And that's another one for black.
January 9th, Chicago and Evanston, Illinois. A shooting that started in Chicago ended in Evanston left 5 people dead and 2 injured before the shooter, 32-year-old Jason Nightingale, was shot and killed by police.
And that would be another one for black.
April 28th, Boone, North Carolina. 2 deputies were killed and 3 other people including a suspected gunman were found dead after a standoff.
And it's another one for white.
March 28th, Essex, Maryland. A man killed his parents and 2 others before setting himself on fire. A 5th person was wounded by gunfire but survived.
Okay, so this is a bit of a strange one because the gunman was named in numerous articles, but I couldn't find any pictures of him or any mention of his race, so I'm just going to put this in the unknown category.
May 8th, Gwynn Oak, Maryland. A man killed 3 people and injured a 4th near a townhouse before setting it on fire. Responding officers shot and killed him. The man was reportedly being watched by the FBI before the incident.
So this is another example of where I couldn't find any photos in any articles of the gunman, but I did find the video that you're watching now, and clearly that's another one for black.
April 6th, New York City, New York. A man killed the mother of his child and 2 of her daughters, then later killed himself at the New York City Housing Authority's Van Dyke Houses Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn.
Okay, this one was a bit difficult. I tried to find a picture of the gunman, but the only pictures I could find were 2 pictures from previous robberies that he had done, which you'll see on the screen now. And as you can see, his race isn't really clear. But considering his family is African American, I'm going to give a point to black. But I'm happy to be corrected if someone has any further information out there. I'm happy to do a correction in part 3.
March 31st, Orange, California. 2021 Orange, California office shooting. 6 people were shot, 4 people, including a child, were killed and 2 hospitalized.
Okay, so this is another one for other. So far the narrative that all mass shooters are white males, or the majority of mass shooters are white males, isn't looking too good, is it? But to be fair, we still have quite a few cases to get through.
March 16th, Phoenix, Arizona. 4 people died after a shooting at a home. 1 man was injured and is expected to survive.
Okay, so this is another case in which I couldn't find a picture of the gunman, but his name was Gilbert Gonzalez, so I think it's safe to put another one in the other category.
March 13th, Indianapolis, Indiana, police found a woman who had been shot and learned there may be other victims at a different home. Police arrived at the home and found 4 dead, including a child.
Okay, so that's another one for black. Next.
February 28th, Cincinnati, Ohio. A man shot and killed his wife and 2 others, wounding a 4th. He was later shot and injured by police in Detroit and was taken to a nearby hospital and died days later.
That would be another one for black. Next.
May 1st, Ashwaubenon, Wisconsin. At a casino in Oneida Land, a man shot and killed 2 people, and seriously wounded another, before being shot dead by responding police officers.
Okay, so we have another white guy. Next.
April 18th, Kenosha, Wisconsin. 3 people were killed and 2 injured after a shooting at a tavern.
Okay, so that's another black guy. Next.
April 3rd, Wilmington, North Carolina. 7 people were shot, 3 fatally, during a house party.
Okay, so I read quite a few articles on this particular story trying to find who the shooter was, and every one of them said that the police were still investigating and that there have been no arrests at this time. So this is going to be in the unknown category.
March 27th, Memphis, Tennessee. In an early morning shooting in northern Memphis, 3 people were killed and 2 people were injured. Of the injured, a man is in critical condition and a woman is in stable condition.
Okay, so that's another black guy. Next.
March 10th, Houston, Texas. 3 people were killed and 1 was injured in southwest Houston. 2 of the victims were 18 years old.
Okay, so a minor correction to the Wikipedia entry for this particular shooting. The early report said that 2 18-year-olds had been shot and killed. It turns out that they were actually in their early 20s. And 3 suspects have been arrested. I'll put their photos up now. As you can see, I think all 3 of them should go into the other category.
February 20th, Metairie, Louisiana. A man shot and killed 2 people at a gun store. Several people then engaged the original shooter both inside and outside the store, causing injuries to 2 more people. It is still unclear whether the original shooter was shot dead by engaging responders or committed suicide.
Okay, I imagine a gun shop is probably not a good place to go on a shooting spree, as there are probably other people in there with guns. It's also another black man.
February 16th, St. Petersburg, Florida. A man suspected in a homicide shot several family members at a house where his grandmother and great-grandmother lived, killing them and his uncle. A woman with gunshot wounds was able to escape to a neighbor's house for help.
Okay, so that's another black guy. Next.
February 5th, Bolivar, Mississippi. A shooting at a club left 3 people dead and 1 injured.
Okay, so there has been 2 men arrested over this particular shooting. Both of them are black.
February 3rd, Colorado Springs, Colorado. A shooter attacked 4 people at an apartment complex near Fort Carson, killing 3.
Okay, so this was a white guy, and we have 1 to go.
February 2nd, Sunrise, Florida. 2021 Sunrise, Florida shootout. 2 FBI agents were shot and killed and 3 others wounded attempting to serve a warrant. The suspect barricaded himself in his home and opened fire before shooting and killing himself.
And the final one is a white guy. Okay, so that's not the result I was expecting, considering there are 5 times as many whites in America as blacks. I was expecting the majority of the shooters to be white, especially considering we tend to hear more about the white shooters than we do the non-white shooters. It definitely creates an image that there are a lot of white male shooters in the US. But the stats don't show that, at least for this year. Obviously, things could change later in the year. There could be a glut of white male shooters, or if we looked at data from a different year, maybe we'd get a different result. Although I suspect the data would be pretty similar to this based on the data I looked at in my previous video. So the end results are 2 unknown, and we're just going to put them to the side because obviously we don't know who they are. And we have 6 white, 14 black, and 9 other. So let's look at this in graph form. As you can see, the narrative that the vast majority or all mass shooters in America are white and that America has a white male problem really doesn't hold water. Only 6 out of 29. And if we look at this as white and non-white, we see that whites only make up 20%, roughly, of mass shooters so far this year. 20%, even though whites make up 60% of the population. I don't know how anyone looking at this data can make the argument that there is a white male problem when it comes to mass shooting. Yet that's exactly what certain people do. Isn't that right, Kylie?
Bull, 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 bull. Shit, 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 shit. Bullshit, 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 bullshit. Bullshit!
Okay, so just to finish up the video, I want to have a look at a couple of comments from part 1 in this series, which made some good points, and I want to look at some of the stats from that clip I played in part 1. But first, those comments.
The graphic is wrong. Over 70% of people in the US are white. Hispanic is not a race, it's an ethnicity. Some Hispanics are white, some are mestizo, some are black. Latino is not a synonym for Hispanic either, and Latino is not a race either. It's also an ethnicity, referring to anyone who lives in Latin America. The Latin refers to Latin-derived languages, specifically Spanish and Portuguese, the latter only in Brazil. Latinos can also be white, mestizo, and black. Some Latinos are Hispanics, and some aren't. Well, no, that's not really correct. It's not that Hispanics are lumped in with whites, but more that Hispanics aren't really categorized the same way when it comes to statistics. To put it simply, in terms that the US government tends to use, Hispanic is not considered a race, but an ethnicity. I work with a US government form quite often that requires respondents to declare their race and ethnicity. In this form you have one option for race, which is mostly what you would expect: American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, or just plain old white. In the context of the form I work with, you can declare more than one, but you must declare at least one from that section. Meanwhile, there's a totally separate question in that section for ethnicity that requires you to check either Hispanic or Latino or not Hispanic or Latino. That is to say that whether or not someone is considered Hispanic or Latino isn't ignored, but it's not considered a question of race as it is a question of ethnicity. Essentially, instead of putting Hispanic in the race box, they instead put a bigger box outside of the race box called the ethnicity box, which is used to subdivide the race box into 2 different boxes and otherwise supersedes the race box. In short, it's not so much that Hispanics are lumped in with whites as that some Hispanics are just considered white in their own regard, just Hispanic white. At the same time, you have Hispanics who are considered black, and Asian, and anything else too. However, meanwhile, traditionally people of Middle Eastern descent are considered white in the US, specifically because some of the first Middle Eastern immigrants essentially lobbied to be considered white so that they would not be considered Asian. This was because at the time anyone who was considered Asian was considered a second-class citizen and had limited rights. And since nobody knew how to classify Middle Eastern people otherwise, they were able to push for themselves to be considered white, while most today would probably consider people of Middle Eastern descent heritage to have their own distinct race. In short, it's 2 completely separate issues, and if anything, I fully approve of having Hispanic as a larger meta-category, because marking Hispanic as its own race in this regard would be far too broad, as Hispanics are far too diverse to neatly fit into one category. Though that said, there could be a legitimate argument to have all of the Hispanic subcategories to be considered their own separate races, but frankly I don't think it's that important. Besides, when it comes to arguing with SJWs and ethno-nationalists,
So in other words, when it comes to defining race, it's not always black and white. Okay, that's a bad pun, but also very accurate. When it comes to defining race, it's not always that simple or clear-cut. So basically the definitions I'm using in this video series are what SJWs would classify as white or black. So SJWs usually, or often, when they're talking about whites, we'll talk about white supremacy as well. So it's usually the white people who fit into that category, which would exclude Latinos and Hispanic people. And what's the latest term? Latinx? Not exactly sure what that's about. But anyway, normally SJW types would not class them as white, but class them as people of colour. And when they're talking about whites, they're generally not talking about them. Same with the definition of black for this series of video. I'm not talking about Indians, I'm talking about African Americans. Black Lives Matter, for example, is about African Americans. It's not about Indians from the continent of Asia. But, you know, those comments made some good points, and it doesn't hurt to clarify that before going on. Now, let's have a look at the stats from the clip I played in part 1, and it's basically related to what we've just been talking about, because the stats I used for whites in America was different than the stats that I used.
But there is one more thing that U.S. mass shooters have in common. They're white. 50 of the 90 mass shooters since 1987 have been white. That's 55%, which is intriguing because the U.S. Census says 77% of the nation is white, and white men specifically make up about 31% of the population.
Okay, so here they're saying that the white population of America is 77%, and the statistic I used in part 1 was 60%. So why is there a difference between those two stats? Well, I suspect that what they did in the clip was they combined white and Hispanic together, which gives you a little bit more than 77%. And I guess the difference would be because the stats are from different years and the population changes slightly each year. So I think that would explain why they're using 77% instead of 60. Once again, this goes back to what we just talked about a few minutes ago and how you define what is white and what isn't. But the other stat that I find interesting is they said that 31% of Americans are white men, which is an odd statistic when they're saying that 77% of Americans are white, because 49% of America's population are male, so you would assume that the percentage of white males would be around half of 77%. So it'd be around 38% if I've done my math correct, give or take 1 or 2 percentages. But that's not a major point. What is a major point is they actually debunk themselves in this little thing in which they're making the argument that it's mainly white men, it's a white male issue. They actually show with their statistics that it's actually the opposite of that. Let me prove my point. So they're saying that 77% of Americans are white, and I'll be using their stats to debunk this, which means that 23% of Americans are non-white. So, in other words, roughly 3/4 of Americans are white and roughly 1/4 is non-white. They then say that 55% of mass shooters are white, which is a little bit over half, which means 45% of mass shooters are non-white. So in other words, 3/4, roughly 3/4 of the population do roughly half the mass shootings, just over half anyway, and roughly 1/4 of the population does roughly just under half. Now, which one of those two groups do you think is the bigger problem? The large percentage doing less shootings, or the smaller percentage of the population doing more shootings? Now, it doesn't take a lot of brains to figure this out. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And I have to ask the question, are they just idiots and they miss this? Or did they deliberately lie to their audience? It's actually hard to tell.
2 Tage noch Munition, danach dann nur noch unsere Hände. Woher sie kommen, wohin sie gehen, darüber denken wir nicht nach. Ein neuer Anfang, ein altes